I'm going to share a link that I read last week that reminded me so much of a Buying into Brooklyn that Rashida and I did in 2018, where my associate Tina, who I think has joined the call as a surprise guest, I'm going to, she said that there is no matter what has happened in New York City, we have lived through 9/11, we have lived through a financial crash, we have lived through Hurricane Sandy, and in 2018, she said, no matter what is going on in the city, this dumpster fire of a city, I will never be able to not live here. And I couldn't feel more, oh, there Tina said hi, aligned with that statement still after all of this. So an article came out this week by New York Post saying why I'm not leaving New York City and love it now more than ever. And I think that people that are probably on this call want to make a further commitment to New York City by possibly buying here. And I'm sure there's people that are thinking about buying upstate, and we can talk about what that looks like to buy in the Hudson and other areas. But I would say that for me, my specialty is really buying here in Brooklyn, and that's who I've guided for the last 15 years. I've owned Realty Collective at buyers interested in buying here at Realty Collective. So I'm Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner and founder of Realty Collective, a boutique firm here in Brooklyn that is I started 15 years ago to defy the stereotypes of real estate brokers before it was cool to be ethical and honest and transparent in this world. And I'm going to introduce Rashida Sadiq, who was my real estate attorney when I bought my house 10 years ago in Red Hook, right after the financial crash. And Lisa Bianchi, who I started working with 2 years ago because I wanted to create an all-women team to work with women clients that just felt more comfortable. And I thought how powerful it would be to work with 3 strong, amazing women guiding you through this huge life decision. So that is us. Did you guys want to add anything to about you or your practice before we get started?
Yeah, just well, welcome everyone. Look like we have a good turnout this evening. And as Victoria said, my name is Rashida Sadiq. I've been practicing real estate law for the past 17, going on 18 years. So I've definitely been through some of the tougher times in New York City. My practice also includes New Jersey. So clients that are, living throughout the boroughs and then decide to move out of the city, also represent them there. Primarily do real estate law and look forward to speaking with you guys.
And hi, everyone. My name is Lisa. I work at Cross Country Mortgage. I've been a mortgage loan officer for a little over 5 years. Cross Country Mortgage, we're a private lending bank, so we work like all the big banks, but all we do is mortgages. I'm licensed in all states, so I can do mortgages everywhere, though my primary business is in New York City, upstate, Connecticut, and around there.
Great, thanks guys. I put a little questionnaire in the thing for a poll about who's actively looking now. If you don't have the capacity to answer the poll because you're on your phone or something, you could raise your hand and say, I'm actively looking to buy now. Just a test of the waters. I've been doing this presentation for almost 15 years when I started doing Buying into Brooklyn with my associate Tina, when I started Realty Collective. We used to do it in partnership with Brooklyn Based, a blog here in Brooklyn that was our co-sponsor. The most recent rendition of it was at the Brooklyn Brewery in Williamsburg, was our host. And now we're taking it online because that's the future. So welcome everybody. There's a small enough group of us to go around if people want to introduce themselves. Does anybody want to go around and just introduce themselves and tell us what brought you here today? You can unmute yourself. Well, everybody's shy.
Hi, I'm Lisa Mitchell, and can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I actually have my real estate license, and I'm originally from Brooklyn, and hoping with my parents, my family, to maybe buy soon, seeing what the market. We just got out of selling a property last year, which was a long, years-long involved family debate in Bed-Stuy, but that's the next step. And I saw you guys' seminar, and it sounded interesting. So I think now is a good time to listen and pay attention to what's going on.
Thank you so much for that. And thanks for sharing your story, Lisa, and welcome. And I hope you learned something today, and let us know if you have any specific questions. We're happy to answer everybody.
I will. Thank you.
Anybody else before we get started?
Hi, my name is Jenny McCormick. I've been looking on and off to buy something, and I said to my husband, if there's one good thing that comes out of this pandemic, then maybe it's going to mean that we can actually buy something. And so had a moment of panic where I thought about moving out of town, and then just thought, wait a minute, I don't actually want to do that. I want to stay in New York, and this is where I want to be. Why am I bailing so quickly? So just, interested to hear more about, what the market is going to do, and trying to get ourselves into a position so we are ready if, the time is right.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And it makes me so happy to hear that you found that you want to stay here, because I feel really passionate about that as well. Everybody's posting online, like, where's everybody escaping to? I'm like, New York, you'll have to drag me away. So it's good to hear other people feel the same. Anybody else want to introduce themselves before we get started?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jason. I am friends with Rashida. I saw her post on Facebook, I think it was last week, about this seminar, and I thought it would be just a really good opportunity to learn more from, knowledgeable and respected professionals in this market about, just really how to proceed during this, this environment of the pandemic, the do's and don'ts, and really just kind of get a better understanding of what's going on. I currently live in Harlem, but I lived in Brooklyn for several years at one point in time. And I think that I am drawn back to Brooklyn because it is a little bit more neighborhood-like and a little bit more quieter. But I really hope that this seminar will answer some of the questions that I have regarding, buying during this time and just really moving forward. So thank you guys so much for putting this on for us.
Well, great. Thanks for joining us, Jason. And I'm glad to hear your love of Brooklyn too, and you're considering coming back here. So a couple people just joined us. So I'm going to just tell everybody we're going to have a 15-20 minute presentation, and then open up for questions. I'll pause maybe during the presentation to ask for questions. There is a chat on the bottom. If you want to ask your question right away, you can leave it there so that I can read it out and you don't forget it. Or you could also raise your hand. So you hit participants and find your name to raise your hand to ask a question. And after this class, I'm going to be sending out Realty Collective. We have a Homebuyer Handbook that is a huge resource of information. And also, I know I've included in there is some of Lisa and Rashida's resources, closing cost calculators for different property types, things that we've shared with our clients over the years that hopefully you guys will find resourceful. So without further ado, I'm going to change my exit full screen and share my screen for the presentation, which is here. Wait, I have to hit share screen. And still let people in at the same time. So I need to hit full screen. There we go. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, good. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing that we all want to think about is why to buy now. So on the list here, you will see you love Brooklyn. That's my reason to encourage people that you feel recommitted to living here, and that you want to benefit from the things that that you're struggling with right now as a renter, which is your rent is really high, that the government has not really given you guys a lot of options if you're a renter to negotiate your position, where people that are homeowners with mortgages have had a little bit more leniency and feel a little bit more comfortable with their situation during this pandemic. You also there's tax incentives, there's the stability of it, building equity, you get to design it yourself, that you're not relying on your landlord to fix things, that it's on your own self to make it the home and space that you love and want to spend time in, and not worry about making changes that are out of your control. So there's lots of reasons to buy. And then once you decide that you want to buy for all these great reasons, we have this thing, I have a calculator that I'll share with everybody after this, the rent to buy matrix. And that starts with at least a 5-year commitment to staying in New York, or a commitment to owning the piece of property and not it being a co-op with renting restrictions here in New York. So if you could tie up your equity for 5 years in a piece of property here in New York City, that is the first part of the matrix to calculate. But listen, if you're in a rent stabilized apartment, you are living with your parents, there's lots of reasons that you might be in the financial situation that buying might not make sense for you. And that's where we have a calculator to help you figure out your cost and expenses versus the purchase scenario to see which is the best scenario for you. So after you've committed to buying and figured out, the numbers of it and make sure it's a good financial decision for you, then you start, before you look on the internet. I know everybody likes to look on the internet because real estate porn is fun. But the first thing you're going to do is assemble your team. And the 3 people you need are your real estate broker, that's a buyer's broker to represent you. When you walk into a piece of property or see it on the internet and you contact that agent, their fiduciary responsibility is to the seller. They're working for the seller to get the seller the best deal. And so that person does not represent you. And sometimes that is misleading, and that needs to be, you just need to understand that you need somebody in your corner. Doesn't have to be me, but you should have somebody. And that search and negotiation part, even if you have a lawyer, that is not covered in what they will protect you from. The other 2 people in your team is the mortgage broker and your lawyer. And your lawyer is going to make sure your contract and the purchase you're covered, and make sure that they do their due diligence to make sure that all of the pieces of the puzzle make sense, and that you are not buying something, a co-op in a building that is about to go into financial ruin, and that they have not been avoiding taking care of a huge problem, and you're going to have assessment moving forward. That's their job. And then your mortgage broker, who is going to calculate everything with you, go over your closing costs, and get you the best mortgage product based on your needs, because 30-year mortgage is not always for everybody. And so you really want to find somebody that is going to counsel you. You're going to spend a lot of time with these people. So you want to make sure that you're talking to people that make you feel comfortable and answer your questions, and that they are not evasive or, avoid giving you all of the details that you want to have. So do you guys have anything to say on that about the dream team before I move on, Rashida or Elisa?
No, I think you covered it exactly. Dream. You have to have that good real estate attorney, the broker that the mortgage person, and also a great broker as well.
Good. So then the other people you might need are a contractor, architect, and inspector. For one, if you're buying a property, everybody needs to get an inspection done, I would say. That is my rule of thumb. I always encourage people to get an inspection done. If you're buying a piece of property that needs work, you're going to need a contractor or an architect. And the last thing you're going to need is some understanding your timeline and the lead time you need. If your rent lease is up in 30 days, and you want to buy something, it is most likely unrealistic that you will be able to find something, get into contract, and move into that place in 30 days. Even if you're an all-cash buyer, I would say that that scenario is extremely stressful, and you probably will end up making a decision that you don't necessarily feel comfortable. So understanding your timeline and what the purchase timeline looks like for you is part of that starting process. Then, before, again, you go on the internet and you look at all the internet porn, you are going to call the mortgage person that you have interviewed and say that this is the person you're going to work with, and you're going to have a very transparent conversation with them about your comfort level of what your monthly expenses can be based on your job and still wanting to save or not save, or now all your savings, instead of putting money into a savings account, you're going to put it towards your mortgage. You're going to figure out with them based on how much money you have down, what your credit score is, and your income, and where you want to live, what your real purchase price is. So that is the next part of this conversation. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to start talking about the pre-approval and versus pre-qualified considerations to get that before you start looking, because you want to have that letter, or the pre-approval letter, before you go looking at property, because if you find the one you want, that letter has to be in your hand so you can submit your offer right away.
Exactly. So as Victoria said, in an ideal world, you are reaching out to me at the same time that you're reaching out to Victoria or a realtor to start putting your team together and figuring out what buying a home is going to look like. So why that's important is because it's not only important that you know how much you can afford, it's also important to know, what your max loan is. And sometimes that might be less than you actually think, and sometimes that might be more. So it's always a good idea to know exactly, how much is the absolute maximum you would be able to get pre-approved for. So the pre-approval process is really fluid. So I'll have a frank conversation with you, and there are 3 factors that we take into account when you qualify for a mortgage: how much you're making, how much you're going to spend, and what your debt looks like. So those 3 factors are really together letting me know what you're going to be pre-approved for. We have a conversation, I run your credit, you get a pre-approval, and you start looking at properties. And as that search happens, as you get closer to finding the right place for you, then we will be editing that pre-approval. So it really is a working draft and a real communication and dialogue between your mortgage officer, your realtor, and the people who are buying the property. So let's say now you found the place and you're ready to really move forward into the mortgage process. So when that happens, then there's going to be a whole bunch of documents that you are, in an ideal situation, have already gotten from me. So if you're self-employed, the very first thing any mortgage officer is going to need is going to be your tax returns for the last 2 years. Because if you're self-employed, that's really how we're going to figure out your income situation. If you're W-2, we need your W-2 and your pay stubs. We need bank statements. We need to know where the money's coming for a down payment. And then with all of those things, we start to put a loan application together. Victoria, do you want me to go through the process of the actual loan application, or do we want to sort of step back for a minute?
I think that once we know how much you can afford then and have really gone over, do you want to talk a little bit before the loan application process and before we go into the search just about the 15-year versus 30-year
Sure.
and an ARM and the no income verification?
Absolutely.
Pre-COVID, I'm wondering if people are still doing no income verification.
Not as much. So the really cool thing about the mortgage process and about a bank like mine that focuses on mortgages is there's a whole bunch of different products. So when I talk to a client, my very first question is, what do you want in terms of what kind of property you want to buy? And my second question is, what are you going to do with this property? Are you buying a home that you're going to stay in until the day you die? Are you thinking of buying your first home that you might keep for 5 to 6 years? The answers to those questions help figure out what the best product is for you. Because if you're going to buy a property, that you think is going to be your dream house for the rest of your life, with rates as low as they are right now, a 30-year makes a lot of sense. If you think you're buying, a 1-bedroom condo that realistically you're probably going to move out of in less than 10 years, then you might want to think about an ARM sort of situation where it's a fixed interest rate for 5, 7, 10 years, even 15, and then you either sell the property before that ARM adjusts or you refinance. The other thing to take into account as you're looking at properties is, we have all 3 mentioned closing costs a little bit. Those really depend on the property you buy and where you buy it. So if you're looking in New York City, for example, co-ops have very low closing costs. You're looking at $4,000 or less typically, versus a condo or a single family home is going to be much more. Similarly, if you're looking in Westchester, the closing costs there are very high. If you're looking in Nassau County and other places, they're going to adjust because they're county specific, as well as purchase price specific. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of programs that's important is, while 20% is the standard for down payment, it is not the only option. So there are some really good options out there right now for 10% down where you get mortgage insurance. There's also FHA, which allows you to put as little as 3.5% down. So these are all the kind of questions you want to have with your mortgage officer as you're going through the process to figure out You know, do you want to put as much as 25% down, or do you want to put as little as 5% down? And, you know, we can guide you through the process of what really makes sense in terms of what you want to do with the cash that you have for this purchase.
Great. I'm going to, you guys can still see my screen, right? Okay, so then I have the slide for where do you search. And I have to say that 6 months ago, I would have given a different answer to this question. We are all very familiar that with, you know, I'm sure people can put in the chat where they search, which is one of the questions I asked when we're doing this presentation. And a lot of people say Zillow and Trulia and StreetEasy and Google Home Search. And now Facebook has a platform for searching. And I would say that the thing that you're missing in all of those is that they do not aggregate all of the New York City real estate listings. So the MLS, which is actually in New York City, the RLS, because it's run by REBNY, is the one place where all of the listings from all the brokers are shared if the broker is part of REBNY. And REBNY, everybody knows, the Real Estate Board of New York. They sort of sometimes have a bad rap, but they keep all the brokers held to a certain level of standard and accountability to act in a certain way. They also are, you know, lobbying for real estate developers and other things like that. But mostly they hold, they have this thing called the RLS, which equals an MLS, a multiple listing service in the rest of the country. And they have access to pool all of this information. And I think most people remember back in the day when you were looking for listings, you know, Craigslist, Village Voice, you'd have to find the small mom and pop broker to help you find the rare thing in that specific neighborhood. And now the real estate broker's job has changed so much. It is not to find the like off-market listing anymore. It is to actually to guide you and be the resource to get you the property and be that coach, rather than find you some off-market deal where they're still also working for the seller and you might get taken advantage of. So I think that the role of the real estate broker has changed, and then where you search has actually changed. So the searching, you can search on all of those sites. Just know that they're not aggregating all of the listings into any one site. So you might want to look for more than one site, or have an agent set up a search for you on the MLS for New York City, so that you can get all the listings in one place and you can get updated on as listings come there. And then besides, where do you search? Where are you searching? What neighborhood? That is another thing working with the agent can tell you about the kind of property that is available. I had somebody a couple months ago say, I want to live in Williamsburg, but I want a doorman building and pre-war details. And I said, yeah, Rashida's laughing. I love Rashida's laughing because there really are I can't imagine that there's any pre-war buildings in Williamsburg that have a doorman. So inventory and the type of product, because the housing is the type of product that is made. You know, knowing what you are looking for exists is part of my job, and helping guide you based on what you say you need for the quality of life that you're looking for helps me matchmake you to the neighborhood that I think, based on what you're communicating to me, would work for your needs. So Williamsburg's full of new construction, so a lot of 6-family houses, converted lofts. The different product types are different for each neighborhood, and that might play into your commute. Maybe you want to be off the L train. Well, then you have to sort of change your search criteria to match what inventory is going to be available in that neighborhood. And there's not a lot of co-ops there either. It's mostly going to be condos, or you're going to try to buy a building if that's something that's actually affordable to you. And I would say Williamsburg, the prices are still really up there for buying a building. It probably will be not for everybody. So that's the first, where are you searching on the internet, and then what you're searching for. And now you've found the place and you're ready to put in an offer. And we got into the negotiating, making the offer and negotiating the terms. Back into full screen there. So you have a couple things that usually things are contingent on. And I'm going to ask, you know, there's the number, and we're going to talk about how you negotiate your number. But really, there's other terms that need to come into it that we need to, especially during COVID, to consider. And I'm going to let Rashida talk about that a little bit. The inspection contingency, the financing contingency, and anything else that you're putting into negotiating pre-contract for your clients.
So one thing I always tell clients is like your offer, you put in your, you found the property, you're not in contract until it's actually signed by yourself and also by the buyer and actually returned to the attorney. So even if you found the property and you say, hey, I put in an offer for a certain amount, there's still things that have to get negotiated, put into the contract of sale, and then finally, I said, signed by both parties and accepted. Currently, some of the main things that you would have in a standard contract, hopefully, is your mortgage contingency if you're getting a mortgage, title clearance, which is making sure that the seller has the right to sell the property. There's no violations, there's no judgments, there's good title to the property, and then also the closing time period. In this day and age, a lot of the buildings, if you're looking at a co-op or a condo, they're not letting access people into the building. So in New York, you do your inspection prior to you signing the contract. In New Jersey and other places, you may do that after signing. But now in New York, standard is you do your inspection, then you enter into contract. However, one of the things that is being negotiated, because you're not able to actually do your inspection physically or have an inspector company go in there, is to have an inspection contingency. An inspection contingency is basically making sure that the physical aspect of the property, they're looking to see if there's any leaks, if there's been, the plumbing, the electrical work. Your contract will have a standard provision that says things have to be in order on the day of the closing, but it's standard an as-is contract, which means that if there was a broken window when you saw the property and went into contract, that window can still stay broken until at closing. You're taking it with that broken window. If the plumbing wasn't 100%, it's still working, so you're taking it with that plumbing. You may have to fix it after closing, and these are things that you want to make sure that when you do your inspection, even if it's all cash, even if it's a mortgage, you still want to know what you're getting. And that's one of the terms that we're trying to work into the contract to have that inspection contingency after you sign, because buildings aren't allowing individuals to come into the building. If it's a house, it's a little easier. If it's vacant, then great, the inspector can go in there and touch things. But some inspection companies now, because of obviously they don't want to enter into a house because individuals are living there and they don't want to get have any issues themselves, they're saying they're not going and doing any inspections. So we try to, once again, put that contingency in the contract if it's necessary. One of the other contingencies is your mortgage. Now, when you put it in your offer, hopefully okay, I'm putting down 80%, 20%, so my mortgage is going to be 80%. We want to make sure that there is that contingency that if for some reason you're not able to get your mortgage, you have a right to cancel the contract. Your typical contract provision has 30 to 45 days for you to get your mortgage. Once you get your mortgage, you're in a firm contract. I try to put in my contracts what we call as a funding contingency, because there's a time period between your mortgage and closing that if something happens, your down payment may be at risk. If you lose your job, if your credit score changes and the bank pulls your loan, you can still have your down payment at risk. So we try to put in what we call as a funding contingency. Prior to COVID, it was 50-50 sometimes whether an attorney will agree to that contingency. Now, in this day, during this time, we're seeing a lot more sellers being willing to include what we call as a COVID-19 contingency, that if for some reason your loan is pulled or there's an issue with the closing, it's delayed, you're not able to close because of an issue related to COVID, you get sick, you lose your employment, your job puts you on furlough, those type of things, you do have a right to either cancel the contract, get the return of your deposit, or we can extend the closing date to make it a longer closing until things change. So these are types of things that when you are putting in your offer, your realtor may be putting in the numbers, but when it comes to the contract, your attorney is trying to negotiate and make sure that's included in the contract of sale. And kind of piggybacking a lot of things is the time frame, that lead time. Standard for a house closing is roughly 60 days. You have 45 days to get your mortgage and then roughly another time to get the clearance of closing, 60 days closing, on or about. Co-op, you're looking at 90 days because you have to get approval by the co-op board. And that's 45 days to get your mortgage, another 2 to 3 weeks to get the co-op approval, and then time to close. Now, closings are taking a lot longer. So you try to hopefully take that into consideration, that it may be a 90-day closing, or it may be a longer time period, because today we had a closing where, once again, the building isn't able, the person isn't allowed to move in. So the seller wants to close, but the buyer doesn't want to close because they start paying on their mortgage the minute they close, and they won't be able to physically move into their property until who knows when. So we try to extend that time period for them to close, or come up with different aspects of it. But those are basically the main terms that you're negotiating when you're about to go into contract as far as an attorney, is doing mortgage contingency, inspections, title, time frame for closing. And if you're looking at a co-op or a condo, we're also doing what we call as due diligence, which is reviewing the condo documents, the co-op documents, to make sure that you're buying into a financially sound building. One of the questions I'm asking the management companies now are, how are they being affected with COVID-19? Are all of the unit owners paying their common charges on time? Do they have a reserve, because they may not be able to pay because they lost their jobs? So if the unit owners stop making their payments, there's still taxes and things that the co-op has to continue to pay. It's like a business. Well, if there's no reserves, that's going to be an issue. You may not want to buy into a building like that. So these are questions that are coming up that you definitely want to take into consideration.
Right, and the co-op building has their own mortgage to pay too on top of that, not just their taxes and other expenses and their employees and management fees. They have their own mortgage they're paying. So that's really good to know. Somebody asked before we move, there's two things. I kind of skipped over the negotiation of the offer part, but I'm going to go back to that. I just wanted Lisa to answer. Somebody was asking about different programs, and I'm assuming that they're asking about like FHA programs, or maybe there's veterans programs, anything that you know of that still exists and what those look like right now.
Right. So yes, in terms of sort of more flexible down payment programs, FHA and VA programs are still totally functioning, and they are a very good option. FHA for people that want to do 3.5% down. VA, if you qualify, you could do up to practically nothing down. It's a special VA program. The thing you have to remember with FHA is that I remember that I talked about private mortgage insurance. FHA has a mortgage insurance built in. So when you have an FHA loan, you're always paying mortgage insurance. The only way you get out of that mortgage insurance is to get out of an FHA loan. Someone also asked about first-time homebuyer programs that there are. The most popular one in New York is Sony May. But the thing you have to remember about Sony May is it has income restrictions, so you can't make too much money to qualify for it. It also has purchase price restrictions, so the properties can't be too expensive. Typically right now, if I had someone who was interested in a Sony May program, I would really think about if FHA might be a better option, just because it's a little bit more flexible right now than the Sony May. But again, things are changing on a day-to-day basis, and Sony May might be a much better option 2 weeks from now than today, but it is still out there. You're on mute.
I'm going to let Lisa, there's a couple, Rashida answered about the Sony May spelling, and then I'm going to, somebody was asking about the closing costs, and I want to make sure that they heard you right, saying that $4,000 for a condo sale, which doesn't seem right.
No. It's $4,000 for a co-op. So co-op closing costs this is not taking into account what you pay your attorney. This is taking into account what you pay for the lien search, for the bank attorney, and the basic closing costs should be right around $4,000 for a co-op, which is very low. If a condo is going to be much higher, because it's going to be more like if you were buying a home, because obviously a condo, like a single family, you own the property, versus a co-op, you own the shares in the project.
Yeah, just to touch base, I know hopefully when you're meeting with your attorney, they should be able to give you an estimate of your closing costs as well, especially for a co-op, because part of the due diligence is finding out what the co-op fees are. So as Lisa had mentioned, part of it will be your bank's, I normally say it's in three parts. You have your legal fee, you have your co-op fees, and then you have your bank fees for a co-op.
Correct.
So that $4,000 to $7,000 can be all inclusive of legal, bank, and co-op. For a house or a condo, you have title, you have your bank, and then you have your real estate tax escrows and things like that. So standard, I would say probably 4 to 6% depending on the property. New York is one of the only states that has mortgage tax. So that's roughly nearly 2%, 1 point something percent of your loan, percentage of your closing costs. So that's why the 4 to 6% comes in when you're looking at buying a condo or a house. But definitely your attorney can walk you through that, because you have title insurance, you have mortgage tax, you have other searches that are done on the property for houses and condos.
And that's an important part of the conversation you're going to have with your attorney. And it's something you should ask them in the beginning when you're interviewing and trying to figure out who the best match is for you. Rashida was the best match for me. Also, I'm going to mention she has not mentioned the real estate broker fees, because you have to pay the bank and you have to pay your lawyer, but the seller gets to pay me. So my services come to you free if I'm your buyer's broker. And then the other thing is the myth that we didn't talk about was the millionaires fee,
mansion
right?
tax.
Mansion tax.
I always call them millionaire. I'm like, those millionaires.
No, New York, unfortunately, is one of the, mansion tax is 1% of the purchase price. So if you're buying a property that's over $1 million, and it goes up as you start buying into the 2 million and 3 million, because, everyone's going to buy that too. But it goes up, but you have a mansion tax. So definitely those closing costs for a house or condo. And then even for co-op, even though co-op is not considered real property, that's still mansion tax still applies to it.
Right. And you can't get an FHA loan for a co-op, right? Because it's not real property. So most of is the Sony May, can you use that for a co-op or no?
You can.
Oh, that's good to know. I
Yeah,
wasn't
you
aware.
can. But again, the specific purchase prices and the co-op the project needs to be approved by Sony May. But yes, it is possible.
That's great to know. So the part of the negotiating and getting into your to contract before that is the making your offer. And part of the biggest thing and service that I help clients with is coaching them to getting their offer accepted. I'm going to tell everybody here, one secret is to write a cover letter. You want to write a compelling cover letter to the seller, getting them to pick you. And I would say in a competitive market, getting your offer in first goes a long way. So if you are quick to ask and you then write a very like buttery, over exaggerating how much you love the property and your future here, and talk about all the charming things that they picked out, even if you don't love them, is going to get people to say yes to you, because a lot of this, we like to look at the numbers and talk, is emotional. It's emotional for the buyers, it's emotional for the sellers, and you need to add that extra layer of making them feel good and confident about who they're handing their home over to, if it's that kind of property. And so I think an introduction letter to the sellers goes a long way with your offer. And then having the broker that you're working with write a letter to the other broker talking about their clients. If I've been working with somebody a long time, if this is the second or third deal I've done with them, I've been friends with them for 10 years, if I've talked about their search process, all of that. And then I can get on the phone and vouch for how I'm going to get these people across the finish line, and we're going to be partners in this. That goes a long way with a lot of brokers. And I think that they then also advocate for you as a client to their sellers, because they know that they have a partner in this process that is going to get the deal closed. And that is a really important thing to have, is having the person that's going to, they can't say, the seller's broker cannot say and do things for you to get you to buy the property and get you to actually close. They can't speak as freely as they would if they were your client. So they need to know that they have somebody that is going to make sure that they help you get to the finish line. And I think that's an important part of having two agents and why that's the norm nowadays. I take a buyer so much more seriously when they show up with a broker, because I know I can talk to their broker frankly about how serious their client is. You know, are they going to drag their feet on things? Like, are they really going to get me, my seller, to get me what I need to get my seller and fulfill my seller's goals and wishes? So I think it's an important part of the negotiation process and the offer process is to have somebody that can speak frankly to that other broker, because it can't usually be you. You won't be able to say and have the industry lingo and conversation that needs to happen between two agents. Somebody's asking one more question. Are there any programs for buying multi-unit properties? I heard something about the 203K loan. I am familiar with the 203K loan. Lisa, I'll let you.
Sure. So yes, the 203K loan is a great product that basically allows you to, so the classic example where someone utilizes a 203K loan is that they buy a multi-unit property, let's say like a brownstone in Brooklyn, right, that needs a lot of work. So the 203K basically builds in the construction loan to help sort of gut renovate the property. It's absolutely an option. It is not an easy loan process, because remember, you're not just getting a loan to buy the property, you're getting a loan to also do significant repairs to the property. But it is something that you can do. You can also, by the way, you can use FHA for multi-unit properties. So yes, it is an option. It's definitely something that is a more, not a faint of heart project. But if you're going through the idea of doing a gut renovation, then it's a really good option to help you have that money to do so.
It was a popular program after the last financial crisis. Tina and I think, did a couple deals where people were buying distressed properties that for some reason the person couldn't afford to keep it and had not done the work on the property to maintain it. And those are usually the unfortunate people that, when something like this happens, are the people that are forced to liquidate their, home asset. So the 203K loan, we did a couple of them, in the 2009, 2010 time frame, that the properties just needed a lot of work, that they fit the, there's a cap on the amount of the loan, right? It can't be a jumbo loan, or I can't remember all at the time what the qualifications were, but it was a big lift to get all that worked out. But those people, I think, ended up making really smart and great decisions, because they got to buy something, renovate it, and then have money to renovate it. Because usually you buy something and then your bank account's empty. So go ahead,
also
Rashida.
kind of piggyback on that. I mean, it's kind of morbid, but unfortunately there's going to be probably some estate sales, because people unfortunately pass away and they're going to have to be selling those assets as well. And a lot of times when you're buying from an estate, their property may not be the best, and they're not going to negotiate with the price and do repairs that you may find in your inspection. So having a 203K program, or that may be an aspect where you can say, okay, I have my closing costs. I know I'm going to have to fix up this property, because in an estate, I'm taking it in as is condition. I can do that program, that money for the repairs to fix up the property. You also want to make sure that your attorney knows that you're doing a 203K loan or FHA loan, because your standard contract says you're getting a conventional loan. And if you're doing FHA or 203K, you have to put in a specific provision in the contract of sale to address that.
Great. So we have gotten through the offer and negotiations, and we're in contract. Now that we're in contract and you put in all those COVID clauses, Rashida, that we talked about, Lisa, what's happening between, walk us through a little bit. We're in contract now. What happens between contract and closing to get to the closing table on the financing side of it?
So, so you have fully executed contracts. After you have fully executed contracts, the first thing you do, if your attorney hasn't done so, is you send that contract to your mortgage broker. And the mortgage broker is now taking that executed contract and creating a loan application, and they're doing a few things. Getting any updated documents they need from you to confirm the three things, right? The income, the property you're buying, and your debt and assets. And then they are preparing the package to go to the underwriter. One of the important ingredients for that is an appraisal. right? An inspection is done by you so that you know what you're getting. An appraisal is done by the bank so they know how much it's worth. The one thing that's happened with COVID is that a lot of appraisers have either done exterior appraisals where they basically go by the property and then do most of the research online. Also, in some situations, you're able to get appraisal waivers where the purchase price is so concrete and basically the loan application looks so great that the bank is saying, I don't need an appraisal for this property. After the appraisal comes in, that's usually the longest waiting period of the mortgage process, is just waiting for that appraisal to come in. It usually takes about a week, and then your file gets sent to the underwriter. And the underwriter is basically making sure that the loan conforms to all the guidelines necessary for the specific program that the bank is offering. Once again, through this process, you're in dialogue with your loan officer and your loan officer's team, who's basically assisting to make sure that any conditions the underwriter requires, you're giving them so that we can move the file forward. After the underwriter reviews everything needed, then they give you a mortgage commitment, or it's also called an approval. And that means that the bank has taken a look at everything. They have given their seal of approval for this loan. And typically there's a few minor conditions that need to be satisfied in order to get the clear to close. For example, proof of homeowner's insurance, et cetera, et cetera. One big condition now with COVID is we are confirming your employment. So we're confirming it during the process, and we're confirming it 3 days prior to closing. So if you are thinking you're going to lose your job, that is a conversation you need to have with your mortgage officer. That's not something that you're like, well, let me just see if this can squeak by, because it will be discovered, and then either your loan has to be entirely restructured or the deal has to be pulled. Also, something to keep in mind is that, right, everyone's working from home right now. So the contact information for your direct supervisor or person from HR to confirm your employment may no longer be the 1-800 number listed in your directory. This is the kind of information you just want to make sure is accurate, because the last thing you want to do is hold up getting an approval or getting a clear to close because we can't talk to the right person to confirm that you're employed. Once those things happen, we get what's called a clear to close. And that means that mortgage is signing off on this, we're ready to go, and we can schedule the closing, and Rashida can work on everything needed to get you to the closing table.
Right. So Rashida, you're going to go over the due diligence a little bit that maybe we didn't get to before the negotiation, and what would happen between now and the closing after we get into contract.
Okay, so first I'll talk a little bit about the due diligence. Due diligence more is for a co-op or a condo. That's where we're looking at the financials for the building, the offering plan, the minutes. Most management companies are now trying to email us the board meeting minutes. And that normally happens prior to you signing the contract. And that's to make sure that even though you love the unit itself in a co-op or a condo, that you're buying into a financially sound business, which is the corporation or the condo association. Because if it's not, you may be subject to common charge increase immediately, an assessment, those type of things. They may have upcoming repairs. So your maintenance is going to be, increasing by 10% or 15%. So you want to know these things prior to you even entering into contract. So it's important that your attorney does that due diligence. And that normally takes about a week or two, depending on the building and how quickly things are moving prior to you signing the contract. Once you sign the contract, I didn't touch base on this, but your down payment and the money that you're signing, that 10%, if you're doing a 10% down, 10% on signing is going to be via wire. It used to be via personal check, but now it's via wire or a bank certified check. Post-COVID, when things settle down, it may go back to being via personal check, but you want to make sure your money is in your checking account. Or the account where you have to wire it to your attorney, and you're verifying any wires that you're sending out, especially in this day and age with fraud. So you want to make sure your funds are ready for when you sign the contract, because that's when your initial down payment is due. So fast forward now, you've been in contract, you've been approved by the mortgage, you are, hopefully you're clear to close. There's an aspect of it for a house that we call the title. So that means there has to make sure there's no violations on the property. Your attorney has to review that. If the seller has a mortgage, that's being paid off. If there are any other title post prior owner issues, that also has to be cleared by the title company and the seller side. And you want to make sure that that's part of that clearance. Your bank is clear, but now you have to have title clearance before you actually get to a closing. And your attorney is responsible for making sure that you have that title clearance. When it's coming to a co-op or a condo, there's additional documents that you need from the co-op. So you have to make sure that the co-op has approved you and that they're ready to issue a new stock certificate and a new lease. Your attorney is responsible for coordinating with all of them to make sure that's cleared as well. For a condo, you make sure that you're getting what we call as a waiver from the condo association, which means that they're not buying the property from the seller. So there's a bunch of other different aspects of it that your bank has been already cleared, but you have to have those other things that come into play. And that's why the closing time period can be extended depending on where you are. But a lot of this is also going on simultaneously while your bank is getting their clearance. And hopefully your attorney's on point and making sure that those things are done. So when you get that clearance, you're cleared by the bank, you're cleared by the title, the co-op has their documents, and it's just getting to the closing. Typically, I talked about with this for the title closer the other day, and I was like, real estate is hands-on. We love to, it's all in person. You're at the table, it's about 10 people at a table. It's like a big dinner party. Everyone's happy. The seller's getting money, the buyer's getting keys. Hopefully that's what your closing is like. But now with this, it's remote. So it's like you can't have 10 people in a conference room at a time. You have to be separate. So right now we're doing what we call a semi-remote closings where we are meeting one-on-one with your attorney. So tomorrow I have a closing. It's just going to be myself and my client at the office. But the seller pre-signed all of the documents. They overnighted it to me. The bank attorney's in the process, actually, as we speak, of emailing me the documents that my client has to sign. In the morning, they're going to wire funds to my office, so then I can wire funds out to the other parties. And New York is one of the few states that has all of these parties kind of together at a closing. New Jersey and some other states is just the title closer or just the bank, just the buyer's attorney. So we may see some of that changing in the near future. As far as probably the next couple of months, as far as just having one party at a closing. With a co-op, it's a whole nother aspect. You thought 10 people, now you're having more than that at a closing because you have to have a payoff, the bank attorney, the seller's attorney, the co-op attorney. And now we're doing, as I said, remotely and via mail where things are being overnighted and held in escrow. And then at the actual day of the closing, everyone's kind of confirming that all the parties have everything, and then we're able to fund the loan. So I tell clients to be patient. Hopefully by the time you guys are looking and find properties, if you're looking in the near future, that part of it may have got a little bit better. But if you're, post-COVID and it's back to having everyone at the table, then you're kind of like a big party, hopefully, at the closing.
And then you get to closing and you sign a gazillion pieces of paper and then your hand hurts at the end and hopefully you remembered your checkbook. I will send you an email reminding you everything to bring to the virtual closing now or the closing. You also can do, power of attorney, if you don't want to go to the closing. What else? Is there anything else about, so then you get your keys. There's now in the time of COVID, we're having a little bit of negotiation of move out. Rashida, have you had any situations where the space is occupied and some, navigating of that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've had a couple of those because as I said, some buildings right now, you're not able to move in or move out, yet the seller may need to close for tax purposes or financial purposes, and also the buyer may need to close because their rate is expiring and it's going to cost them too much to extend it. So we have what we call as post-possession. Prior to COVID, sometimes if a seller is buying and selling, you have maybe a 5-day or a 7-day post-possession. Now you're seeing something of more of like 14 days for post-possession where money is held back in escrow. The seller is able to stay in the property until they're able to move out, and they pay the carrying costs to the buyer, pay their mortgage. So there's things like that that's being negotiated. Also currently seeing where the seller is voluntarily saying, hey, I need you to close. I'll pay the maintenance for the next 3 months or, a couple of months so you can close and you won't have to worry about, I'm starting to pay on a property that I can't live in yet and start incurring those costs. So we're seeing those type of negotiations.
And what about the walkthrough?
The walkthroughs are actually, I have a client just emailed me because we're closing, and the walkthrough have to be, well, 2 scenarios. One, whether there's going to be kind of a virtual walkthrough where the realtor goes with the camera and kind of does it for the buyer because the buyer's out of the state and they've given their attorney power of attorney. Or you can do what we call as a socially distanced walkthrough where they allow the buyer in, the buyer goes through and does it by themselves, and then they exit and clean it out. So it's not that you're going to be there with your realtor as you're doing the walkthrough. It may just be you in that property doing it by yourself, and you just have to make sure that you're taking the time and turning on everything and making sure everything's working.
Yeah, and I mean, product is coming to the market. I've listed 2 places in the last 2 weeks for sale. I'm getting calls, we're doing videos, so things are happening. I think, we're starting to go back to business happening, not as usual, but definitely, the market's picking up. So it's a good time to be thinking about this and getting your ducks in a row. And I put some articles in the chat about, saving for your down payment and down payment alternatives, borrowing against your 401k, just some things I like to help people sort of strategize, how they're going to get to having their down payment. Were there any other questions? I think we answered most of the questions that were in the chat, and we went over a lot of the in the time of COVID changes that we've all been experiencing in the industry. Anybody else you can raise your hand, or you could put your question in the chat, or you can just talk, or we can wrap it up. So if anybody has anything they want to add, I'm going to give it a minute here before that we end things. Does anybody want to share what neighborhoods they're thinking about buying in or looking in? I'm interested to see where the demand is. I know that a lot of people are thinking about moving out of Manhattan so that they can get outdoor space and some other amenities and quality of life, live closer to some of the parks. Is there anybody that's still looking in Manhattan to purchase?
Hello. Hi. Hi. My name is Melissa. I'm a friend of Rashida's as well. And thank you for having this. The areas that I am particularly looking into or starting to look into are Crown Heights, East Flatbush, and Bed-Stuy.
I think those are great neighborhoods you're looking in. So you're mostly interested probably in a brownstone?
I'm interested in a multi-family home. So yes, a brownstone did catch my eye in Bed-Stuy for $1.7 million.
Yeah.
But I would like a multi-family home. I did see another home on Midwood that I think it's a 2-family, but I need a unattached driveway. So like a lot of those homes over there don't have driveways, and it's not unattached. They do have driveways. But my number one priority when I am looking is to have an unattached driveway, and it has to be like a 2-family or more.
That's interesting to hear. That's a challenging thing. So that there's a difference, like I said, at brownstone, because those ends up being 1 to 4 family. When we say multifamily, for me that usually means 6 units or more, which would mean, just from industry lingo, like a 1 to 4 would be I guess multifamily. But I don't know, I don't use it. I usually say a townhouse or a brownstone or a limestone, and refer to the architectural details associated with the property rather than the building size. Somebody asked if this will be available afterwards, and yes, I'll take the recording and put it online. Somebody asked about how, in your team, who do you get first? And I would always say the broker is probably the first person, because if you don't have
any of your team, the broker usually has the resources. I'm legally bound to give you 3 references of each industry person. So I'm not just giving you, hey, call Rashida, or hey, call Lisa. I'm giving you a list of people for you to call and interview, and then you pick who you want to work with. But I have vetted all these people and know that they are team players, that they're going to advocate for you well, and I'm going to work with them well to make sure that they don't stand in the way of getting you the property. I've definitely had lawyers and mortgage people that have made the deal more difficult, have not worked with me, and have made it a more stressful. It's already a very stressful process. They've made the process more stressful for their clients, especially when they don't work and talk to the other person, because we're on a team here together. We all have the same goal, is that to get you to the property that you want. And this is about your needs and not ours. And so making sure that you're working with people that have taken ego out of this equation. And no, of course not Rashida, but I would say lawyers sometimes have some egos. if I'm going to say,
I'm not offended. I work with I deal with some of them that have.
You know all the time. I would say that's less so in the banking part. I've had less challenges with mortgage brokers being team players than I have with lawyers, because lawyers have definitely been difficult.
I do, just to add to that, along with obviously, putting your team together is so important. Also make sure obviously, I think the 2 factors that are really important when you're putting your team together is you're going to be working with your attorney, your broker, your real estate broker, and your mortgage officer constantly through this process. So you need to make sure that you like them, that you want to work with them, that you trust what they have to say. If you're in a situation where you're second guessing what either of these 3 professionals are telling you, then that's probably not a good fit, because you're going to them because they're the expert that's going to give you the proper advice for, or the proper options to make the decision that's best for you. And that would also be the second thing I would say is on the mortgage end, when you're talking to people, you should definitely, I would say, be directed to someone, especially in this climate, who's giving you some options, because what might be available today might look a little different 2 or 3 weeks from now.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's really a good idea to have, not just the perfect program available, but a backup option if things change one way or another. So that's, I think, questions you should definitely ask as you're interviewing your professionals.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying about the attorney part of it, and I said I've been practicing for 17 years, and I've worked with so many attorneys, whether they don't do real estate or they think they do real estate. But you must make sure when you interview them, ask them, do they primarily handle real estate? Are they familiar with co-ops? Are they familiar with condos? Are they familiar with multifamily? Are they familiar with residential? Particular areas? Are they familiar with the boroughs or Westchester or Nassau County? Also, do they have support staff? If it's if they go on vacation, is there somebody else that they have as backup? Kind of what's coming in light with COVID-19, that we're working remotely, and I've been trying to get in touch with some attorneys, and they don't do internet. They used to just do fax and trying to do things via email and trying to get things closed, and also being able to give them alternatives, like, look, you can still close. You may want to handle this with your client. So you want to have an attorney that's flexible enough to kind of see the different aspects. I kind of say one of the, not just, but I've been a bank attorney, I've been a seller's attorney, a buyer's attorney, a co-op attorney. So when I'm approaching aspects of this, especially now in this COVID-19, I'm like, okay, I can take this on because we just need to get this closed for our clients. And what do you need me to help you do? And that's also very important, because you may get your property, get your mortgage. The main thing is now getting in contact with your attorney, who's the one responsible to making sure you get to that closing and making sure you're at that table. And if you can't get in touch with that attorney, you're not closing.
Right.
I had a realtor call me and had the buyer like, can you step in and represent me to get to the closing?
That's crazy. I put a link to a blog that I wrote, or the company wrote for our clients on how to interview for a real estate attorney, and just some basic questions you should be asking real estate attorneys so that you have at least the interview part of it down. And you could probably use those same questions. I'd have to look at it. I can post an article. I think I have an article on what to ask mortgage brokers. But if you feel like you know more than the person, then you probably are not picking the right person. And I have emphasized this so many times with people: do not hire your uncle to be your lawyer. Do not hire your friend to be your lawyer. You need a New York City real estate attorney. They do real estate closings on a daily basis. It is like, that is their bread and butter, because the other laws, like has so many little intricacies to it. You want to make sure that you have the seasoned expert to get you across the finish line without being the hurdles. And I would say the deal killer lawyers, I like to call them, are usually the ones that don't do real estate day to day, because they don't value as much. They like the law part of it, where you're like the haggling and the back and forth arguing, because usually that's what lawyers do, is the arguing back and forth and defending their client. But here in real estate, it is it's customer service. You are serving your client to get them to make, and protecting them to get them to their goal. You are not trying to argue with anybody. That is not your job in this role here. So you want to make sure you're picking the person that's not, the other kind of lawyer. Somebody asked the question if this was a good time to buy. So there's a couple of parts to that. One, this is a great time to buy because money is so cheap. Historically cheap to get a mortgage, is historically cheap to interest rates. I paid, when I bought my house 10 years ago, it was 5.5% I was paying on my mortgage. I refinanced down to 4.25%. I can't refinance now because I don't have any income to prove, but that if I could, you could probably refinance with your own bank and get under 3% for some scenarios. And that is that's lower than most people's student loans. And that's one of the cheapest amounts of money that you can borrow. Credit cards aren't competing with any of it. It's historically low to actually borrow money. So that is a huge incentive to actually buy. What I have followed, yes, there will be prices coming down for certain types of product. The luxury product market, I definitely see is going to come down. Any new construction that just hit the market before COVID, or was supposed to come on the market or online right about now, is definitely going to have to make an adjustment. Also, anything that's coming out of the estate situation is probably going to be discounted, and Rashida went over the reasons why, because Lisa, about it being in an estate condition. So those will be probably opportunities that will sell lower than what the market is bearing. Right now, the market indicators it's hard to tell because in the spring there's a flood of inventory. Deals are still happening. I don't see the numbers fluctuating in a huge way towards lowering like we did after the financial crisis. Rashida, are you seeing big differences in the offering price and the purchase price?
Interesting enough, I've seen where people are actually getting another offers coming in and they're losing it. So we've had clients that have put in, we've done the due diligence, and then there's a person coming in a bit higher. And I was just like, what is going on?
I'm not surprised. I listed something and my phone is ringing off the hook for this product.
And it's because, as you say, the amount, like your interest rates are so low. So you're locking in a 30-year for 3.1, 3.2, something like that. And then also, if you're looking at the type of properties, if you're looking at for houses with more space where people want that, there's going to be, is that, how many properties are on the market for that? And
right.
So you have to look at,
If I could just jump in. So going back to, important questions to ask. One question you should also ask as you're interviewing mortgage professionals is, what's your turn time? What's your underwriting turn time? Because that's going to give you a really good idea of how quickly they can get you a mortgage commitment or can close you. And if there are other people bidding for a property, that's very appealing to a seller to say that, we can, get you the approval in 30 days instead of 45, or we can close in 45 instead of 60. So that's something that you need to think about as you look at at, you know, putting together a competitive offer.
Okay, so we talked about a lot of things, and we are way over the 5 o'clock stop mark. So I'm sure that there are other questions or things you guys want to ask us, but I would just say reach us out to any one of us individually. A call is free for any of us. I'm happy to talk to anybody, and you can pick my brain and take as much knowledge that I can give you without having to physically meet in person. As I can, I'm happy to walk you through any scenario. So, and I'm sure the same is for Lisa and Rashida. And I thank everybody for joining us today. And you will get a follow-up email from us with some resources to help you start this journey. And I'm excited for all of you because buying a home was the smartest thing I feel like I have done in New York City. My mortgage is less than I would pay in rent right now. And I'm very, very thankful that my real estate broker twisted my arm and helped me get to the yes, because I just definitely took me I needed to be encouraged to do that. So thanks everybody. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks everybody.